Welcome to the AI Corner. I'm your host, Mike Bailey, here to spotlight the people shaping New Zealand's AI future. In today's episode, we're speaking with Dr. Guy Bate. Guy is thematic lead for artificial intelligence at the University of Auckland Business School, where he directs the Master of Business Development program and teaches strategy and innovation. Guy is a leading voice on how AI can transform teaching, learning, and organizational practice. Welcome to the pod, Guy.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you with us. What first sparked your interest in the intersection of AI and education and leadership?
I mean, for me, I've got a background that's sort of tangential to AI. So my background is mostly management consulting prior to entering academia. So I spent 20 years in technology consulting, mostly focused on pharmaceuticals, biotech and health tech. So in my last kind of corporate role, I was involved in AI-driven health tech platform. So I've got a background in the business side of AI. So I've always been interested in that kind of intersection around AI can give insight through data. But I think it wasn't until I started teaching full-time at the business school that I really kind of started to see the value. And that really came off the back of GenAI specifically, as opposed to other analytical descriptive aspects of AI more broadly. And for me, it was the idea initially that GenAI can automate those sorts of things. It can give answers. It can get you to think. But I think it was when I first started working with it myself in an educational context, trying to prepare materials for classes, but also seeing students, but also executives who I was working with through a professional development team, seeing them actually use AI. What came out of that for me was not so much what you would traditionally see as the kind of productivity automation use cases, but I started to really be kind of intrigued by people's reactions to it. And those are the kind of effective and emotive reactions when people first type something into AI, GPT or Gemini or Claude, whatever it might be, and they get their first or an unexpected answer. And of course, we often kind of consider those sorts of things, the kind of sparks of doubt or fear or just surprise with AI as its potential to hallucinate, its potential to accentuate or amplify biases, all those kind of things. What that sparked in me was actually it's telling that person something about themselves. Me as a teacher, as a lecturer, as an educator, it's telling me something about them. And that's what really fascinated me. And that was the kind of hook. How can I start to use generative AI in a different sort of sense?
Interesting. And you've talked a lot about the AI mirror, and it sounds like you're sort of leading into that point there, which we'll dig into in a second.
Sure.
But, working in AI in a previous life, and what I'm hearing is that was pre-GenAI. What was the conversation like around the technology kind of back then compared to what it is now? Of course, the hype is at a different sort of scale, and there are a lot of people who are interested in AI as an emerging technology pre-22, 23, but much different conversation, I would imagine, and then sort of, tell us all about it.
Very much so. I mean, so most of my background in technology consulting was focused on data. So I started working for a company that basically had a monopoly on healthcare data sets and was using it for consultancy work. And when I ended up in this sort of startup in Australia, the trend then was not just analyzing data, descriptive analytics, but it was working towards, well, how can we use it to do real-time predictions? This was kind of off the back of the stuff you were seeing in the consumer space around, data being collected at checkouts and supermarkets. But how could we use that in the health kind of tech space? So it was moving from descriptive to predictive, real-time forecasting, but then to prescription. So the idea of suggestions. So through a health analytics platform, how can the data analysis that's being done prescribe or suggest what you as a user might do next with that data? So that was kind of what I was seeing. And it was really cool at its time. But of course, GenAI, what we have right now, goes a step further than that. So it's not even just prescribing. It's actually, it is, but it's going so much further than that. It's creating. And I think that's the big step change that we're all facing, and one that's exciting for how we can use that in not just university learning, but also broader organizational development.
Do you feel like some of those use cases that were talked about pre-GenAI, as you say, predictive and was the craze, predictive analytics and personalization and all that, and it almost feels like some of those use cases, for right or for wrong, have been put to the back burner by a lot of business. And I can understand why, because you start off with GenAI, you realize that it can help you be more productive to reduce your cost to serve and be more efficient in how you create, edit, analyze, extract, whatever it is. But that predictive use case is seen as like the next frontier for a lot of businesses, I would say. It's harder to crack, right? You have to have much data at the center. You have to have that piece. But I don't know if you see similar in some of the conversations you have.
Yeah, that was always the issue, trying to get enough data so that you could actually get the algorithms predicting effectively. You've got to machine learn off the back of rich data sets, and those sorts of data sets that are particularly focused on those sorts of settings either weren't freely available. So it was healthcare data sets that were fragmented, or due to privacy and data siloing, just weren't available for training. At the same time, I think when you started to look at the prescriptive side, so analytical suggestions, what I was seeing when I was in health tech was the idea that they weren't good enough to actually really inform decision making in the moment. So a lot of what we were working on was, say, advanced CRM, working with business to business customers and with, healthcare professionals, those sorts of people. So it was to help companies make better use of suggestions to have those sorts of conversation with these business to business and advanced stakeholders. And it just wasn't good enough. Again, the sort of localized data sets weren't available. At the same time, it kind of took a level of autonomy away from the user, which for a highly trained user, highly trained salesperson, key account manager, business to business consultant, was distracting rather than useful. I think what Gen AI does in that kind of setting, if we can get it right, it has a better potential to actually augment. Because, for instance, those users, those business development people or whatever, if they're working with Gen AI effectively all the time in a way that's ring-fenced and secure and safe, that AI can actually start to work to accentuate them because it gets to know them. So it really is enhancing in that way. And I think that's probably another thing where I see the value of Gen AI in the kind of leadership management training settings I'm working within, that you can really accentuate yourself because your background data through use, potentially accentuated through your actual wider data sets available for your organization, but also because you've been using it and you've been you're part of that data set. It then accentuates you, it knows the sorts of work you're trying to do, and it can capture that. So I think that's really where it's gone beyond the prescriptive, the predictive prescriptive, to actually be more than that. Going back to the predictive side as well, I think we've all realized that pure prediction, pure forecasting is always going to be uncertain. It's always going to be based upon the data. It's always going to be limited. Yeah. So I think the predictive side of it was always going to be kind of a bit of not a dead end, but it was going to be a limited use case. But what we have now with Gen AI is the ability to really scenario plan, the ability to try multiple different options to feed into any sort of scenario planning, to run complex Monte Carlo simulations, et cetera, in a more sophisticated way to plan futures, to engage in foresight experiments. So again, it's taken us, in a way, it's taken us backwards. Back to more the human over the data, but we can use the Gen AI to accentuate the human to run things faster and to augment and get us to think together. So I think it's actually, maybe we reached a bit of a plateau. We've stepped back to the human, and now we can accentuate the human rather than relying just on the data to drive our decision making, almost in that kind of prescriptive manner.
Fascinating point, especially on the scenario planning. I think that's an excellent one. And it's almost as if the predictive piece was really challenging to solve for back in the day, let's say, because the data wasn't where it needed to be. If anything, Gen AI has become the catalyst to say, I need to sort out my data, which means that in theory, the predictive piece should become better, or the fact that LLMs are able to better handle unstructured data, whatever it might be, means that that use case might actually become more of a reality than a panacea for a lot of brands who perhaps aren't set up for it.
I think that's a really good point. And I think if organizations can get better at leveraging their own internal data, as you say, the unstructured data as well, and be feeding that appropriately into the models, then that's great. And that, again, is why I think it's important to move beyond simple web apps and generic tools like Gen AI, like ChatGPT, which are wonderful in what they do, but building your own systems and localized local models, I think is really, really important. And that's getting easy all the time as well, isn't it? With Microsoft Azure Foundry and that kind of thing, and the ability to sort of mobilize and shift in and out of your kind of subscriptions through those sorts of platforms as well. I think that needs to be something companies are thinking about, and us as university too as well.
Yeah, and even on the personal front, you've got OpenAI wanting to become that personal assistant, at all ends of your life, and having that full context and awareness of everything, which again, a bit of a utopia for some and scary for others, which is interesting.
I think that's interesting. I mean, there are really interesting EdTech companies because, as you know, I'm also the chair of the AI in Education Technology Stewardship Group for EdTech New Zealand. And there are some fascinating examples there from companies that are really looking at that developmental thing over time as well, that longitudinal development. So a wonderful company called Neurofrog, led by Tim Haynes, who are doing great stuff to try and understand the development process from children onwards, to consider how you can basically be mobilizing that learning process and it being almost a feedback loop, obviously done ethically, responsibly, and everything else. But the idea that AI can be a partner over the long term, I think is really compelling. Again, there's always going to be the concerns over privacy, always the concerns over ethics, and they're obviously forefront. But if we can get it right, then the opportunity to partner with AI to really advance what we can do is outstanding.
Yeah, absolutely. And ethics is an interesting one. And speaking to someone of the line of work you're in, I'd be really curious on your perspective on ethics, in particular, I guess, around like the likes of training data and fairness and copyright and all that type of stuff. Where do you sit on a lot of those, I guess, decision points where there is a lot of the community in education and the creative space who take a lot of concern with how those processes work out? But I'd be curious on your perspective in that area.
It's a really tricky one. As I say to people on a daily basis, students and educators alike, we're really building this plane as we're flying it and grappling with these sorts of things as they come up. There's always going to be a lag, and it's a lag led by big players who we hope are thinking about these things, but it's us as the users who have to be sensitized to the potential risks as well, because of our very specific use cases, our very specific applications of these sorts of technologies. So it's really, really important to have that kind of critical sensitivity to how we use these things in real time. I think one of the important things to think about as well is that, some aspects of values, the things we value, which are part of, moral philosophy, change as we engage with technologies as well. I mean, there's great work, and it's intuitive as well in some ways, that, values such as what we deem to be private, not to say privacy itself as a regulatory construct isn't important, but what we value in privacy as individual human beings has changed over time with social media, etc. So our sense of what privacy means to us is different probably to our parents, our grandparents. So with technology, with immersion in new technologies, our human values do change and evolve over time as the discourse changes. So we have to be cognizant of that as well. You read the literature on trust in AI. I mean, there are various journals that cover that, almost as a part of their main offering, critical debate on what ethics is in AI. And there are so many different ways that the word trust can be framed in terms of artificial intelligence and use. But I think the anchor points, the best anchor points are, what comes down from, good governance practices, from UNESCO, OECD, the big working groups they have internationally to kind of frame what responsible AI looks like. And I think it's a matter of using those guiding principles and then being critically aware of your own grounded use cases and seeing how they best apply. But knowing potentially that mistakes will be made, because sometimes you don't know if something's going to have impact till it's done, and it's only then when you actually gauge a response. So, we need to get this right, but we need to be forgiving of ourselves at the same time as we all learn together.
Yeah, there's certainly two sides to that coin, right? Like we want to protect people and individual rights and what people can see and access and all the rest of it. And you sort of, the other side of the coin there is, if we lock everything down too much, are we stifling innovation or use cases? And that debate is not going to stop anytime soon, right? There are different ways that different countries and regions are approaching it. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And New Zealand is sort of, the government, it seems, has sort of taken a bit of a step back and sort of said, this is what we believe, we'll adopt these principles, but enforcing those principles is perhaps another full discussion in itself, right?
It is. And I think one of the things I kind of think about as a grounding principle of myself, not to say that's something that, really has to be universal. It's not something I'm kind of mandating, but it's that sense of care. If you hold on to that with your use of AI, you hold on to caring practices. We are trying to nurture people, and that's really obviously important in education, but also organizational learning and development more broadly. If you have good grounding principles about care, good pedagogy, then hopefully that won't lead you astray. It's a constant tension between innovation and regulation responsibility. But again, AI is one of the latest and most critical debates there, but it has been part of the discourse around pretty much every technology over the last 50, 80, 100 years, so there's nothing new there. And I think, the fact that there are these different sides of the debate make sure we are always critically engaged. But again, I think it's important to critically engage whilst moving forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can get stuck in the debate rather than just making decisions and progressing and innovating. You describe Gen AI not just as a tool, and back to your point, but as a mirror. I mean, what does that mean to you in practice, and how does that impact managers and leadership and in the education space?
Well, the term mirror actually was coined by a philosopher of technology, Professor Shannon Vallel, and I followed her work quite closely. And one of the things I've really taken from her work is the idea, and it's the idea that really helped take me not away from, but helped me think differently to just the automation idea of Gen AI, which is an incredibly powerful aspect of it. But to think how we can do something a little bit more differently in the education space. And going back to the point where I said it's interesting to see how people react when they first use AI, or when they're confounded by it, or whatever it might be, to think, well, what did it reflect back to them? And Shannon Vallel's idea for the AI mirror is that we need to be critically aware, not just of it in terms of its potential biases. And I think we hone much of our discussion around the bias of the LLM, or the bias of whatever orchestration sits above the LLMs that fires things at us, like, the issue with, was it Grok a while ago around Mecha Hitler and everything else, because the functionality within the orchestration had been turned off. All great things, but I think it's that ability to say, well, what does this tell me about me? We think about learning. Learning is always intersubjective. We learn by working with others. We learn by being immersed in practice. You as a software person, you've learned, I guess, from working in agile teams, through the interaction and the mistakes you've made and mistakes the teams have made. It's not just from a textbook, it's through practice. So I think that's the same with AI. Can we make it an extension of our practice, such that we're critically aware as we engage with AI, just as we're critically aware, as well as habituated and predisposed in the way we work with others? So we talk about good reflective practice in a team. We think, well, what went bad today? What went well? What can I do to improve? We think reflexively in teams, and reflexivity is about thinking about or reflecting on yourself and your own reactions. So in the team stand-up today, I felt really uncomfortable because someone said something that made me feel like I wasn't performing at the right level. What does that tell me about me? Because I've got more control over me than I have over the other people in the team. And maybe it's just me because of something that happened in the past that made me react in a way that wasn't constructive. And we teach that to our students in our capstone projects when it comes to actually good agile practice, being reflexively and reflectively aware. So thinking about that and the AI mirror with how we engage with AI, it's thinking, well, when I put a prompt in, I'm putting some of myself in there necessarily, because there's words I use that may carry with it some meaning, some part of myself. Therefore, what I get back from it isn't only an output of the scraping from a biased data set and maybe inherently biased training. It's also weighted by what I put into it. And we can kind of be accountable for that. We can also be reflexively aware of that. And I think we can learn something about ourselves in that process. So one way I'm using it, or myself and a colleague are using it in a young leaders development program, is to do exactly that. Use the idea of the AI mirror to make people critically aware of what they're putting into a discussion with AI. So for instance, just a very generic example of maybe young leader development. So we've put together custom GPTs that are basically reflexive coaches that take you on the leadership journey. You can chat to them. If, for instance, as a young leader, you say, well, actually, I'm really nervous going into this program. I'm pretty young. I'm only an undergraduate. I don't really feel like a leader. How can you help me get over this? You're not just going to get a flat answer out. It's not just going to be rescraping and vectorizing the training data. It's going to be based, it is, but it's going to be based on the input you put in it. And that input is inherently loaded. And it's inherently loaded in that example with, I'm a young leader, I'm nervous, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the answer that comes back has to make you critically aware of what you put in. And it starts to open the door to, well, actually, I'm obviously inherently concerned because I'm a young leader. What does that tell me about myself? There could be many young leaders out there don't feel that way. So it exposes yourself just in the same way as if you're a good reflective practitioner. A conversation with anyone in your team might be able to tell you more about yourself. So that idea of the AI mirror is something I'm trying to develop in my own teaching so that people become critically aware of that. And that's really, really important as well as we start to move forward with AI, to be critically sensitive into the moment as to what you're putting in and what you're getting out.
Right.
So I've got examples from executive leadership programs where we work on scenarios, simulating board papers, that kind of thing. And, you can hear an answer back. Well, that was a really good scenario that particular GPT put out there, because we have custom GPTs we've developed for these kind of settings. Why didn't I think of that scenario? That's a really interesting question about yourself. And you can learn from that question. What is it that maybe ChatGPT did that I can now learn from? So it's a consistent learning process. So going beyond automating an output, because I want some scenarios for my board meeting, it's let's learn as a senior leadership team why we're not thinking about these things. Are we assuming too much going into the conversation? So we're closed, we've got kind of groupthink. Are we limited by our own market conditions such that we can't think outside that box? Can we push ChatGPT and that GPT to think harder than us to make us think better?
That's a really interesting concept around the way I talk to AI. If I reverse engineer the prompt, the output it's giving me, and take a good hard look at what I put into it, you start to go Inception in some way, shape, or form there, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's a good point.
I guess what I'm hearing is that you can use it as a personal development tool in different ways that people are really thinking about. How do you think the likes of, sycophancy plays into that, where it's, trying to be nice to you and kind to you and be, it's also subservient in some way? Like, how do you think what implications do you think it has for the concept of the mirroring?
Significant implications again, because all those parts come back to you. You've got to think about what it actually means for you. Obviously, the sycophancy thing varies week on week as they tweak and fine tune things. So goodness knows where the different models will be this time next week. Maybe we'll go back to the Mecha Hitler situation with Grok or something. Who knows? But I think again, it's that awareness as well, and also, going back to thinking about my own experiences when ChatGPT was hyper sycophantic a few months ago. The frustrations that causes, because you're actually wanting more critique, tell you something about yourself as well. Am I expecting too much of this? Am I starting to expect answers? Am I pushing it hard enough based upon my own knowledge? So am I again putting enough into it to get what I need out? It's sort of shifting some of the responsibility back onto you to think harder and develop yourself, because the model's always going to change. The nature of the history that feeds the data set that is priming the model with your history is always going to change. And it's not thinking, I'm going to get definitive answers here. It's helping you think harder, helping you think in different sorts of ways, and also being more critically aware of your prompts. So I love the idea of prompt engineering. I mean, we teach it as basic introduction to these things, but we've got to go beyond that. And as we start to work with it on an ongoing basis, it's that critical responsiveness. It's that skill to actually have a conversation with something that isn't human, that gives you what you need, but also expands your own horizons. And it's something you can only do through immersion, I think.
Does that play into, you talk about auto-fabrication in some of your writing? And how AI shapes not just our work, but also who we become. Does that play into that realm in what you were just describing? Yeah,
I mean, the idea of auto-fabrication again comes from Valor's work and some prior philosophizing around what it is to be a self, to be a human being. And a part of auto-fabrication, I think it came from a Spanish philosopher. I can't quite remember the name that Valor built from, but the idea that we always are accountable to be sort of bettering ourselves and reshaping ourselves through a constant kind of feedback. And applying that to the use with AI shifts the responsibility back to us again to be the ones that auto-fabricate. Right. So do we deny AI, or do we use it to help us auto-fabricate, to make us more morally and ethically accountable individuals through our critical awareness, not just of AI, but through our interactions with it? Our kind of, quasi intersubjective interactions with it, just like we should be with another human being. So in innovation, we talk about the growth mindset, the idea that we're always open to learn. So in a group situation, if we get criticized for something, rather than saying, well, actually, I can't do anything about this, I'm going to get a bit miffed about it because they're wrong, I'm right, because I know my capabilities, you're open to saying, right, well, I think I know my capabilities, but maybe this is telling me something about something I can learn from to adapt more. So you're always positively, optimistically wanting to grow yourself rather than closing yourself down as a limited set of capabilities that can never go further, which means you're always going to be resistant to people who say you could do better. It's the same with AI. We auto-fabricate, we have a growth mindset, putting a different sort of psychological innovation spin on it to grow with it. And that's not to say we're only using it for that purpose, but it's that critical awareness as we use it for other purposes that helps us grow with it and helps us truly become a kind of collaborative augmented intelligence. And, we hear Ethan Mollick and others talking about augmented intelligence or whatever it be as the alternative AI for the acronym. And that's the way we need to do it, not just seeing it as a glorified search engine to get outputs, but being critically sensitive to it as we work with it, just like we build our growth mindsets through working with others.
Yeah, treat it like a colleague, but as you say, in a more of a critical way than just taking and copy pasting and sharing it as part of our own work.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because one of the things I use GenAI a lot for is that customization of custom GPTs to create definitive personas that people can engage with to do exactly that. And I think that's another one of the things I really kind of push within my educational setting, being able to do that. So I've created GPTs that simulate famous philosophers, people to converse with, to challenge themselves to think differently, famous scholars or strategic or innovation thinkers, very sort of combative fellow board members you can play around with, VCs, venture capital people who aren't friendly, so you can practice pitching to them and practice understanding what that might mean for you as someone who's pitching, and also conflict management simulations as well. So I think that's another aspect of these basic generic tools, is you can make them non-generic. One thing to think about there is also by creating those custom GPTs and custom interactions, you can actually purposefully divert the bias that is inherent in the sort of general models that sit underneath them by giving it a specific persona, a specific slant as whatever sort of person you're trying to have a dialogue with. You can actually bring it back to some sort of focus that is yours, rather than just hallucinating or pushing back generic biases.
I love that. One of my favorite GPTs have got Elon Musk basically telling me how to work faster or harder and something like that. And I've got some of the C-suite in our team sanitize some of the transcripts and put in certain questions that they frequently ask.
There we go.
A good way to prepare before meetings to make sure I'm trying to cover as many bases.
Exactly. So it's thinking about how to use things in different ways to really develop yourself, rather than just a tool for outputs. Yeah, really nice examples.
Just before we start to close up, you work a lot with students and young entrepreneurs, and how are you seeing them work with or shape AI differently to, as you say, most people are treating it as a search engine at the end of the day or to help them think faster, but how do younger people who are at the forefront of this from a research or a study standpoint, what are they doing differently to everyone else?
Sometimes it's not that clear how our own students in a course are using it, for obvious reasons around, concerns over, how they're meant to use AI, and that's a separate conversation. But through sort of quieter dialogue, and also talking to previous students, and I had a wonderful chance to interview an ex-student of mine plus two students from Adelaide University as part of my role with Ascolite. Ascolite is this really quite challenging acronym, and I've got to try and remember what it's called, but it's the Australasian Society for Computers in Learning in Tertiary Education. So it's been around since computers were invented to support tertiary education, and now it's got a big focus on AI. And I interviewed these two from Adelaide particularly. It's a company they've just founded called Tutbob, Tutbob. Wonderful pair of founders who developed this coming out of their bachelor's in entrepreneurship in Adelaide, University of Southern Australia. And basically this is the beautiful example of that kind of sensitization to the use of AI. So the whole business or a whole venture and the whole platform they've developed, which is an AI platform, was based on the pain points they and their fellow students were feeling during their quite traditional lectures. So not feeling able to take notes, not feeling able to understand things if your colleague was neurodivergent, that kind of thing. So it's very much sensitized by their kind of lived reality and experiences. And that sensitivity, again, allows you to immediately see the opportunities for AI to be applied. And they've developed a platform and they literally just came out of their first degree about a year ago, and they've been developing this since, and they've since joined EdTech New Zealand because they want to try and enter the New Zealand market. So a bit of a plug to them. But it's that kind of critical sensitivity of yourself and your fellows that allows you to see the value if you can see Gen AI as something that can be deployed. And you can only do that if you're really good at using Gen AI, so you're sensitized to it as well. So it's knowing yourself within depth, knowing AI and its potential, and being sensitive to how you can make it work in new ways. And I think that's kind of what I see with young people, their ability to potentially, because they become immersed in AI, to immediately see its utility because they're sensitized to their own lives and where it can add value.
Right.
And that's kind of what I'm hoping to see as we move further on. We've of course got to get the foundations right. We've got to make sure the human is capable.
Yeah.
But then if we can make sure the human is capable, we can help AI through the appropriate level of immersion and use, accentuate that capability. And I think that's what we're hopefully seeing with students coming through who are more immersed in it.
Well, yeah, you're certainly at the forefront if you're working with young people who are exploring this space and looking for maybe a less trodden path, outside of the standard career.
Yeah.
Well, there's going to be some pretty exciting use cases, but really appreciate you taking the time, Guy. Are you up for a quick fire round before we finish up?
Oh, give it a go. I'll give it a crack.
Sounds good. ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini?
Definitely ChatGPT for me. No particular reason. It's just the one I've been using. And after 6 months of jumping between them to see which one was best and asking the same questions to them all, I got tired of the experiment and just stick with ChatGPT now.
Good on you. Most overhyped AI trend right now?
It's just there to automate. I know it's an amazing use case, and I know it really works, and I do it all the time, particularly as we're starting to get agents coming up. We need to be able to use it effectively so we can free up time to do the creative stuff. But I think it's also knowing how AI can help us be more creative and do that other stuff as well. The other thing is that AI is doing all the thinking for us. That's another myth I would like to kind of knock over. It could do, but our job is to make sure it doesn't, and it accentuates our ability to think.
Love it. You mentioned automation. Out of interest, what automation tools do you like to use, or how do you go about it?
I'm a little bit nascent there, and I want to get better. I want to free up time to do it. There's so many good sort of note, because I'm not a coder. I've got no idea. I spend a few hours for a month every day trying to get ChatGPT to code for me. And of course, got fully entangled in all that nonsense around getting it to critique itself and be able to sort its own code out. With no code knowledge, I just failed abysmally. I can't pretend. There's a term for it, isn't it, when you just use it to code, and I can't remember what the term is. There's a term.
Vibe coding.
Vibe coding. That's the one. Vibe coding did not work for me.
I'd say you didn't fail, you learned in some way.
I learned, exactly. Thank you very much. I've got to bring that auto-fabrication mindset back to myself. No, nice one. But with all the idea that now that no-code kind of agents are coming out, I really want to get used to those so that I can get better at doing that as well. That's the next thing on my own personal development curve, I think.
Good on you. You mentioned one New Zealand company in AI earlier, but do you have any others that are quietly doing great AI work that may not be on the radar of most people?
I think people should look at Tootbob, because they've literally just joined EdTech New Zealand now as well, and looking at trying to see how they could support the New Zealand market as well. So I think Neurofrog and Tootbob are both ones I'd like to plug that are doing really, really cool stuff. And it's EdTech with almost an AI-first lens, and I think that AI-first lens is quite a powerful one.
Wicked. Thank you for that. And what's your number one recommendation for people on how they should get started? Like, how do you, rather than just start using ChatGPT, but do you have a particular inroad that you give to people to say, just give this particular use case a go?
I think it's the custom GPTs, or at least, prompting in a way that gives it almost that conversation inherent custom GPT in the first place, because otherwise you're going to get generic answers, and it's just fun to play around with ChatGPT as if it's a person that you've always wanted to talk to. So if you're a philosopher, make it a philosopher. If you've got a manager, make it your manager, like you've sort of done preparing for C-suite meetings, that kind of thing. Have fun with it in that way, because that's where you're going to get the most value and see its potential. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Guy, for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners. Please subscribe to the channel for weekly episodes to hear more from the people building New Zealand's AI future. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to the AI Corner.